on one interface instead of shutting down the interface, for example, on all of the interfaces. Okay, one interesting command is the show running, okay, config, then OSPF, to see the OSPF configuration. And also, if you need, for example, to restart OSPF process for some reason, you can use this command, restart command, restart OSPF, and then tag. For example, in switch 1, I'm using this command, restart OSPF A. Then OSPF process should restart, and after that the neighborship should be established again. Show IP OSPF neighbor. Now we have the neighborship. As you can see, the uptime now is 5 seconds. This means that OSPF neighborship is shutting down. Very good. Now we have another interesting option. Let me talk about the secondary IP address. You know that we can configure secondary IP address in IPv4 in interfaces. For example, Loopback 1 now has only one interface, quad 1/32. We can configure one secondary IP address, 1112/32, for example, and this is the secondary IP address. Okay, let me configure it in the, for example, NXOS1 for the Loopback 0 interface, Loopback 0 IP address 1112/32 with secondary option. And now if you check show run interface Loopback 0, you can see that this interface now has two IP address, quad 1/32 and 1112/32. And as you can see here, we enabled OSPF on this interface. OSPF by default advertises all of the IP address of an interface. For example, primary IP address and also secondary IP address. Look at here. In NXOS2, if you check the routing table, show IP route OSPF, okay, as you can see, now we receive both of these networks, the primary and also secondary. By default, OSPF advertises the primary, both the primary and also secondary. Maybe it's good for you and maybe it's not good for you. If you don't want to advertise the secondary IP addresses, you can configure this with this command, switch config. Okay, switch config if. You can use the command, for example, IP router OSPF, okay, and then you should use the tag or instance, and then area ID, for example, area ID, and then you should use the secondaries known. Means please don't advertise the secondary IP addresses of this interface. Secondaries, for example, none. Let me to show you how we can configure this feature. For example, NXOS1 in the interface Loopback 0, I'm using IP OSPF A area IP router OSPF A, IP router OSPF A, okay, area 0, then secondaries known. Now we have this configuration, show run interface Loopback 0. As you can see here, we have two IP address, one primary, one secondary, and I enabled OSPF on this interface with the secondaries known. Means please don't advertise the secondaries IP addresses. Now we can check the NXOS2. Look at here. Now we have only the primary IP address. This is useful in some features. And also, we have one interesting option about the loopback interfaces. You know that by default in OSPF, when you are configuring the loopback with the mask, for example, such as /24, /25, 26, OSPF advertises by default that loopback's IP address with /32. Let me to show you. First, I'm going to the, for example, switch 2. This is the switch 2. On the Loopback 0, we have now one IP address. Let me to change that IP address to quad 2/24. Show run interface Loopback 0. Look at here. The IP address of this interface now is quad 2/24. Let me to change this IP address to quad 2/24. And let me check the NXOS1 or switch 1 in the routing table, show IP route received from the OSPF. Look at here, we receive quad 2/32. This is the default behavior. If you don't want to advertising the, for example, all of the loopbacks IP address with /32, you should configure it in OSPF with this command. Look at here. For example, you need to advertise /24, /25. Okay, switch config if on the interface. You should use this command IP OSPF advertise, okay, subnet. Let me to show you in the NXOS2 interface, for example, loopback 0, IP OSPF advertise subnet. That's it. Show run interface loopback 0 show us that I enabled OSPF process B on this interface, okay, and also I enabled IP OSPF advertise subnet. In NXOS1, now we can see that the mask is 24. Before the mask was 32, and this is useful for some, for example, troubleshooting examples or some scenarios. Very good. This is the configuration of OSPF neighborship. In this video, we learned about how we can enable the OSPF feature on the NXOS, and also how we can configure OSPF process and the differences with the iOS, how the OSPF in NXOS selects the router ID and the differences with the iOS, and how we can enable the log adjacency change, and after that how we can shut down and also turn off and turn on the OSPF totally. Finally, we learned about the enabling OSPF on one interface, how we can disable OSPF on one interface, and after that, how we can how we can prevent OSPF from advertising the secondary's IP address on one interface, and finally, how we can configure OSPF on one interface to advertising subnets. Also, we learned about the, for example, cost calculation in the NXOS. Finally, we learned about the monitoring verification command, commands in the OSPF, show IP OSPF interfaces, show IP OSPF neighbors, show IP OSPF database, show IP route with OSPF tag, show IP OSPF, show running config OSPF, and finally, how we can restart OSPF. We will learn about the OSPF features in the future videos more and more, but for now, it's a start of the configuration of OSPF in NXOS. You should implement this scenario again and practice all of the features I did in this scenario.